my questions about how do we leverage, I did write it down, how do we leverage machines to enable us to be better at our job, kind of stuff. And really all this started with some of my studies in territorial sustainable planning, and it really came to bear when I, like I described last night, kind of worked on this urban planning in Tirana, which was all parameterized in a very finger-skilled moves, but we coded all the rules, all the urban regulations, all the investment patterns possible, all the infrastructure things, and we were able to generate a model that contained all of that and tried to do it. Lesson learned, we coded 160 parameters, we only ever used 15. So what I'm going to show you today is kind of how that informed my, I don't want to call it research because I'm not a researcher, but kind of my methodology into engaging with all these things that kind of are growing super fast and bring them down to analog speed, which is the only thing I can deal with, and try to insert them into our working practice. I call territorial strategies pretty much anything from a placemaking of 15 meter squares done with recycled materials in front of a school or next to my house to a whole sectional region between 3 states. Because scale is not interesting to me anymore. I don't think it's what defines our practice anymore. It is, and also that is one massive gap that we went along from Maria's drawing on the floor with a tie to now we can generate shifting sand cities in 15 minutes. I mean, that is the skill. So our kind of, in my mind, our practice has to be super pragmatic and kind of identify what is the suitable perimeter of action into the task that we're doing. What this methodology is trying to not be is to do something new, which supersedes all the stuff that we've been spending centuries learning. Because, again, to repeat myself, I understand our practice to be in a continuum. So we have to use new skills, new tools, new technology, new processes to be better in a continuum of our profession. And I think at this point also thinking about what our profession is, what are we good at as humans, designers, and what are the tools that we have to make us even better without maybe wasting times doing pedestrian tasks. I understand this methodology as a relational model, which is, I'm not an expert, but it's kind of a psychological process where you try to map the relations between things and you don't really mind about what the things are. So the context, you can imagine is like a cluster theory, kind of everything is connected, and what you're trying to govern is how one action connects and reacts to a bunch of other actions. And if you manage to map that in the context of governance, for example, you know that if I spend some money here, this money can be influenced through governance into all these places, and this is the parts that you have to kind of govern and entice, and maybe generates other project on as response to one intervention. So why are we doing it? I know this is what I thought it was right when I wrote this presentation. I'm not sure I agree with myself anymore, but in essence, it's kind of trying to give us a better understanding of how we can influence the world. That's my very basic philosophical point. And in reality, this is kind of a generic thing, but this is a very simple workflow, and I put it up there because it's still the same workflow. We're still trying to do the same thing. We're still trying to do the best thing with the money that investors have to give them the right return so that we can actually do the projects rather than just talk about them, which is, I mean, I'm a very kind of pragmatic professional. I want to work because I have great ideas, but only some work. And so I have a stash of useless great ideas and a few that work, and those are the one I invest on because my ambition is to try to do my best to improve the environment that we live in. So how does it work? I mean, as a basic thing, I was talking to someone last night. I'm not geeky enough to pretend to know how it actually works or invest time in research and things. So I discovered through my practice that my skills is to generate questions and never be happy with a question that hasn't the right definition. And so I based all of this at the start, which kind of create an environment where we can investigate our task through asking questions. And I mean, this will kind of grow up, but in very simple terms, what's above is generally analog, old school. What's below is generally data-driven, digital, machiney, new school, right? Just as a simple navigation tool. So the idea is kind of identify a project, which is often in itself a collaboration system, and define the question you're trying to answer, and iterate that with a skill set and data. The data are generally organized around ESG systems because A, it's something that it's widely understood, B, is what drives investments at the moment. We can debate good, bad, KPIs, and all that kind of stuff, but in essence, that's the environment that at least my practice kind of engages in, right? And the skill set is not necessarily people, but is the knowledge you need to drive the project forward and to refine the questions. So this thing for me is identifying all the things, all the advisors, smarter than me people and stuff I will need, or our team will need, to be able to respond in an ideal world at the right question, at the right time, with the right set of skills, right? That's, I'm very lazy, so if I can get someone else to work at the time, it's kind of very useful for me. And also, I believe, I guess the new system is all about leveraging skill sets. We had this morning kind of people with very specific skills that are super useful to very generic skills like a designer skill set, but the interface between them is not always, I'm talking about your presentation actually, but it's not always obvious how we can leverage those knowledge into a simplified design process. And I think that's something that really interests me. So, and I think having a kind of hybrid analog digital sequence is very important. Well, these two things kind of iterate to redefine questions and get them to the level that they're actually workable. As you move forward, we kind of put all the information that we found into a large analytical model, which means, again, no scale. You'd have transport information, socioeconomic data, presence of people, down to skill kind of data that you gather by virtually walking through Google Earth down the streets and observing the bed state of a set of bricks or the quality of a door or things like that, right? So the old scales we try to put them in the same place so that we can interpolate them in a way that allows us to be more creative and more interesting. And once that model has iterated, we can migrate it into a more traditionally architectural place, which is a generative model, so a more Rhine environment, a more now shifting sand type of environment. And this then becomes more kind of commercially traditional, if you want. At some point, we've got to explain to people that do not care a bit about all this stuff that we love, why we're doing it. And so we get to scenario generations, which are a simplification of this thing in a much more kind of communication-based environment where, much like the Google Earth that I hope you played with, it's a super simple tool that everybody can have on their phone, but it gives information that nobody has imagined yet. And that is the interesting part to me, right? Because we want to define the future. That's kind of, at least if the designer in the room, that's the kind of kick we get out of our job. And so the simplicity of communicating to as many people as possible why they should support our vision, it's a very important thing. And again, for the more numerically minded people we have to deal with, the advantage of having everything in a digital environment is you can press a button and it turns into numbers. Not quite like that, but that's the kind of stuff. And there's all part of data visualization and all kind of things, which I don't have to explain because I'm not the best person in the room to do that. And at the end, you basically have some reporting, which is a more traditional thing, but for example, our reports are an interface rather than a book. And so while you're looking at the result of our work, you can question it, and you can, at the moment, fairly clumsily, I'll have some video that show what that means later, but you can kind of test the parameters that we have got to to create a response, an immediate response to the shape making of the urban environment. And the reporting becomes more boring, but the idea is that we already have a set of reporting systems that answer questions that the World Bank will ask, or that an investor will ask, that they will have to, that the developer will need to go and ask money to a bank. So how do we do it? So that's what we're trying to do. In essence, every one of those boxes is a work in progress, because I don't believe in end results. I believe in work in progress results. And so we keep working on it. And I'm lucky enough to have a very diverse set of environments where I operate. So I have easy access to a bunch of different skill sets, from economists to a neuroscientist to designers, urban designers, digital designers. So we're trying to build, every time we have the opportunity, to kind of reinforce bits of this process. So this is an example of one of the latest interface we developed. It's partly in Italian because it's an Italian piece of urban things, and we basically investigate through a combination of space syntax and open source data, both geospatial and socioeconomics, a simple representation through a heat map, because we thought that was the easier thing for us to understand what was going on, of the project question: where do I put a mixed-use residential social engaged development into a neighborhood? The questions in this case are the sliders on the side. And so the model, which is all three-dimensional, of course, tells you by heat mapping the situation what is the most favorable position for what you're trying to do. Because we call it an analysis. In reality, I now try to call it exploration, because it's analysis that is trying to answer a question rather than trying to learn a general vision of things. So it's a designer version of an analytical mindset. So once this process is ended, which can be done kind of like you saw at the meeting table and things like that, so we're trying to simplify the process of engagement with very complex data sets. This is an example of the more generative model. So that thing is exported. There's a real life site with all more kind of traditional set of understanding of data and distances. And then through various iterations, you can decide how much you want to do the traditional way, how much you want to ask machines to help you, back to the tools that we just saw, right? In this case, we kind of prioritize simple, get to a no is not possible as fast, the fail fast approach. So we have the simplicity of urban regulation parameters, distance from other buildings, incidence of sunlight, or whatever, heights and all this kind of thing. So if all these things get told no, 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 and you reduce yourself to, it's like a constraint-driven approach to what's possible, and then you try to be creative as you can manage inside what's possible, rather than have dreams that invest a lot of time and then they're not possible, so you kind of lost the time. I'm driven by laziness, right? So that's a very important fact for me. It's like, I gotta do stuff in an efficient way because I'm very lazy. But in essence, inside this model, you already have a distribution of assets. You have the ability to, for a certain asset, step into it for more parameters. So the simple one is residential distribution. You can set out what program you have, and it kind of tells you what's best to be placed. You have some environmental analysis. This is sunshade, but you also have wind pressure and stuff. These are then interpolated with economic data. Windows with more sun or look in a better way are worth more money, so that's where you want to put fancy apartments. Lower window with less sun, so maybe it will change. Soon the windows looking north where you don't get overheated will be worth more. Who knows? But that's the kind of stuff you can interpolate into this. And so you have again, a fairly high level amount of information all interpolated into a simple place, which is, to me, a useful tool. Out of this, you can then create workflows, more traditional workflows that actually deal with the problem that you found or with the solution that you're trying to get to it. At the larger scale, this is a different project, so it's a kind of slightly different things. These were more urban asset management driven, and so we had the potential of creating new volumes inside an urban existing situation. So the same kind of approach generates or tries to engage with different problems, different answers, different questions. And all in this case, kind of numeric representation becomes more important because this was an institutional investor trying to go and talk to a city and say, hey, I want to do this. Which rule do we have to change for making it happen? So, didn't find the rules to change or to making it happen, just for the record. And again, for simplicity, this is my heritage of having kind of professionally grown in the UK. Everything is kind of an optioneering system, and depending on who you want, you get a kind of a traffic light approach or a more gold, silver, and bronze approach, depending how you want to spin it. But in essence, you kind of create a matrix so that every iteration is mapped on the same question, and you're trying to compare bananas with bananas rather than kiwis with fish, which doesn't help anybody. And again, in Italian, every one of those points, you click, and as, again, the simple discussion, very short discussion of why we think that's green or yellow, and it often kind of develops a subset of reasoning that gives us an answer, or our judgment of an answer. This can be automated. In reality, the latest try we did, we have an automation, and a bit like you do with the AI that writes your email responses, you want to read the email before you send it, because we're kind of still there. Hopefully, we'll still be there for a long time. And there's numbers, so for people that understand numbers, you extract graphs that they understand, because they don't understand urban, beautiful picture. They want graphs and say, this is good, this is bad, it takes a long time, I need a lot of money. And then this is, again, very similar, kind of the next up from the, it's beeping, so I'm stopping. Next up from the massing version, it's a AI-generated simple render from a Google Earth model, just to give an idea. And yeah, right on time.